Hello, welcome to your second research methods flip learning homework. You started with an introduction last week just into some of the key concepts to do with research methods, and today we're going to explore our first actual research method, which is questionnaires or social surveys. So the first thing you need to know is the difference between a questionnaire and a social survey. A questionnaire is a set of pre-selected questions in written form, and participants write their answers back. Now a questionnaire can be about literally anything. You will have done thousands of questionnaires, well maybe not thousands, but you will have done a lot of questionnaires in your lifetime. And in fact, actually a questionnaire, that's how I met my wife. My wife answered a questionnaire, and I'd written a question for her that was, if I asked you on a date, would your answer be the same to the answer to this question? If you think about that, that is WRIS. So that is, a questionnaire. The difference for a social survey is that a social survey is about social issues. Okay, so what we'd largely be using in sociology is social surveys. Questionnaires, they are questionnaires, they're exactly the same format, but it's the topic that matters to make it a social survey. So a questionnaire about a social issue, about things related to sociology, that would be a social survey. So again, most of the time, that's what we're talking about when we talk about questionnaires in sociological research. Okay, so we also need to be aware that there are a couple of different types of social surveys or questionnaires that you'd potentially be using in sociological research. Most commonly, what we're talking about is self-completion questionnaires. So that's a key term, and that's where the respondent is, filling out the answers themselves. Now, you do need to know that actually sometimes what you get is the researcher reads the questions out from the questionnaire and writes down the answer for the participant. Technically, that's not a questionnaire. That's called a structured interview. We're going to learn more about that in a future week. But that it is using a questionnaire, but the researcher is reading out the questions for the participant. The participant doesn't actually write anything down themselves. They talk back to the researcher, who will then record it. That is a structured interview. So be aware of that one. That's probably the most important on the slide here. You also need to be aware there's kind of postal questionnaires where the questionnaire gets, or the social survey gets sent out to lots of different participants and then gets sent back. This can be literally through the mail, or it can be emailed, or it can be, there's different websites that you can use to do that. So again, generally we have self-completion questionnaires, sometimes done in person, and you're handed a physical kind of paper copy in the same room as a researcher. And sometimes it's sent to your home. Probably more often it's sent to your home. For these first couple of research methods, so questionnaires and interviews that we're going to be looking at, it's important you know the distinction between closed questions and open questions. Hopefully you're already aware of this. Closed questions are questions that have a limited chance to respond. So a basic example would just simply be yes/no questions. And so on a questionnaire, you might get very close questions that literally have a tick box that are yes or no, or sometimes you get ones that are on a scale of kind of strongly agree to disagree, or 1 to 10, how much do you agree with this? Well, the key thing about closed questions is they produce quantitative data. Data that is numerical, data that is numbers, that can give you statistics. Now, open questions are the opposite. These have no limited set responses. Okay, the participant can respond however they want, with as much detail and depth and explanation as they want. That produces qualitative data, so it's quality, not quantity. And so that's usually allowing us a kind of much more detailed insight into what the person's thinking and feeling, because they can fully explain themselves. And this will be relevant when we start talking about the strengths and weaknesses of questionnaires and social surveys. Majority of the time, vast majority of the time, questionnaires are closed questions. And so we'll talk about why that's a good thing, why that's a bad thing later, but you need to be aware of that. If we're talking about closed questions, talking about questionnaires, what we're talking about is closed questions that produce quantitative data. Okay, so it's time to start thinking about the strengths and weaknesses of using a questionnaire to conduct sociological research. You should remember from last video that the way we're going to kind of think about these strengths and weaknesses is through the acronym PERVERT. So the P from PERVERT stands for practical. There are practical strengths and weaknesses for each research method that you would write about in an exam. Practically, questionnaires are really quite strong. One key thing is they're very quick and easy to make, because you're literally just writing one set of questions. You don't have to write a set of questions for each person you're going to do your research. It is a case of writing one set of questions, and that then is used for every single participant. Once you've written it, you can also email it out or put it on a website, which generally is quite easy and quite quick. It also is really quite cheap. Like, you could do a questionnaire actually for free. There's very few methods that would be completely free. Doing postal questionnaires, if you're actually using the post, then it would cost a little bit of money. But still, compared to other methods, this is really quite a cheap method. And not only is it kind of quick and easy and cheap to make, it's also really quick and easy to analyze. You don't need the researcher there with every single participant. If you do self-completion questionnaires, you could have thousands of people who've all got the questionnaire at the same time. You don't have to be there. They send it back. That makes it really quite easy and time efficient. And also, because the data tends to be quantitative, because you use closed questions, it ends up, you often get numbers. So you can get computer programs that will quickly tot up the data for you and turn it into a statistic. And so you get really quick, easy data in terms of analysis. You can make your conclusions quite quickly from that. If it was open questions and qualitative data, a researcher would have to read each individual response and have to read everything that the participant's written, which would take ages to then draw a conclusion. So these closed quantitative questionnaires can be really easy to get the actual final conclusions from. On the whole then, they're really quite strong in terms of practical issues. The big weakness is the low response rate. And what we mean by that is, if I send out 1,000 questionnaires, actually most people just ignore it. If I emailed it, it would get deleted. If I put it through the post, it would get thrown in the bin. And so what you have to do is you have to send out a lot more questionnaires than you actually need responses for, because a significant number of people aren't going to bother doing it. And so that is a practical weakness. You have to waste a bit of time there, or a bit of kind of energy resource, sending it to a lot more people than you actually need. Right, so the E in pervert stands for ethical issues, talking about what's kind of morally right or wrong when we're doing research. Whenever you're thinking about ethical issues and looking at research methods and answering questions, you'll basically be saying, if you do this, then this research will be ethical, or if you don't do this, then it will be unethical. It's not that it's always one or always the other. It depends how you conduct the research. Some research methods are quite easy to keep ethical, like questionnaires, for example. It's quite easy to avoid deception. There's not really any opportunity for you to lie to people about the research in a questionnaire, because the questions are just written and they're there and they're in front of the participant and they can read them. The same with kind of informed consent. You can't really do a questionnaire on someone without them knowing, because they've got the questionnaire there in front of them. If they don't want to do it, they simply won't fill it out. There's no way of them doing it by accident, really, or kind of sneakily getting them to do it without them knowing. The potential weaknesses in terms of ethics for questionnaires mainly come around confidentiality or anonymity. You've got to make sure that nobody who reads your research and reads the results can work out who's been involved in the questionnaire. Like, there's no way that someone should be able to identify any of your participants. So that's the main thing, is keeping people's personal data confidential and anonymous. The other thing is sensitivity. Questionnaires probably aren't suitable for kind of highly sensitive, triggering topics, like domestic abuse, for example. It wouldn't be a good thing to send a questionnaire that's got questions, how many times has your husband abused you the last however long. That would be really quite damaging to the participant's mental health, bring up some horrible feelings, and nobody's there to help them kind of sensitively go through this in a safe way, because the questionnaire, generally self-completion, you're doing it at home on your own. So you've got to make sure that you're keeping information confidential. That would make it, if you did that, then it's ethical. If you don't do that, then it's not. And same thing of dealing with sensitive topics. If you deal with non-sensitive topics, then you're fine, ethically speaking. If you're dealing with kind of more highly sensitive topics, then it's probably unethical. Okay, so now we need to look at reliability and validity. These two are the most common mistake made by students doing A-level sociology. Mixing these two key terms up and getting them the wrong way round is the most common mistake. So make sure you get them sorted in your head from day one, please. Reliability is all about how easy it is to repeat in the exact same way somebody else's research. So if I wanted to test the reliability of somebody's research, I'd read what they did, I'd try and copy it exactly, and then see if the results I got were similar. Questionnaires, when you're doing questionnaires, it's actually really quite easy to do that, which means they're high in reliability, or more likely to be high in reliability. The reason why it's easy to do that is because the questions are writ and set in stone. They're already written for you. You can use the exact same questions that a previous researcher has done and send it out and do the questionnaire in the exact same way, really quite easily, probably more than any other method. And so that means it is more likely to be reliable. On the other hand, we've got validity. Now, validity is not about kind of how easy it is to replicate or repeat. It's all about how accurate or true the information is. And this is probably the factor that you'll spend the most amount of time talking about, kind of when you're doing your research methods essays. Validity, there's normally more kind of depth and detail there than the other issues. In terms of questionnaires, there's a couple of things that make it strong. There's a couple of things that make it weak. On the whole, what you get with a questionnaire is going to be self-completion. So that means that the participant is at home alone. They're not in the same room as the researcher when they're filling out their questionnaire. And what this means is it reduces the chance for interviewer bias, for the researcher kind of leading the participant to particular answers, or the participant trying to guess what the right answer is that they want the interviewer wants. And so that, if they were doing that, that would be invalid. But because the researcher's not in the same room, and most of the time questionnaires are done, at home alone, you don't have interviewer bias. The other strength that's similar is something called social desirability. It's a key term. And this is where participants would make up answers in order to make themselves seem better or seem good. Like if I asked a question, how often do you read for pleasure? A lot of people might lie and exaggerate how much they read to make themselves seem more intelligent. So that's called social desirability. Now with questionnaires, again, you're at home, you're alone. Largely, if it's ethical, you know it's confidential or anonymous, so you don't feel perhaps like you need to lie or impress anyone. You feel a bit more comfortable to give the true and accurate answers. And that means the data is more valid. Now you could argue that both ways. You could say actually when it's a piece of paper and nobody's there, then it's you don't really care about it. It's quite easy to lie. Whereas when you're face to face, some people might find it harder to kind of like directly lie to someone's face. And so you could argue that actually questionnaires are less valid than, for example, something like an interview. An interview where you're face to face with the researcher and they're asking questions, you might say that some people might find it harder to lie face to face. So that point's quite good. You can use it as a strength or as a weakness and argue it both ways. Another weakness with questionnaires might be the actual questions themselves and the way they're worded. And there might be what's called leading questions, which kind of take the participant to a particular answer. And so there's a number of different ways that can happen. It happens when you're kind of creating the questions themselves. That will lower the validity because people aren't expressing their true and accurate answers if the question kind of takes them to one answer above another. But the biggest weakness probably of questionnaires is the nature of the data you get. Okay, vast majority of the time it's closed questions, so you're getting quantitative data. You're getting data that's kind of based on restricted answers. Yes, no, agree, disagree, 1 to 10, that kind of thing. What that means is you cannot get a full, in-depth picture of what people think and what people feel. And so you're not getting the full truth. You may still be getting truth, but you're not getting the full truth, and that means it's lower in validity. If you're doing something like an unstructured interview, then where you get the chance with open questions to fully explain yourself, then that means you are more likely to get valid data. But with questionnaires, that doesn't really happen. The answers are generally restricted, and so that's a problem. This links to interpretivism, which is one of the two theoretical perspectives we'll be looking at, and in the T in pervert is kind of theoretical perspective. A later video will explain this in a lot more detail because it's quite tricky to wrap your head around. But basically, because you don't get that full in-depth meaning, because you get quantitative data, not qualitative data, interpretivists would say this is a real problem. You're not going to get valid data, and that's going to be a real problem for them. You can kind of argue against that a little bit and say, so some questionnaires might have open questions, but what you'd say if you're doing that is that would take a lot more time and a lot more effort to create and to analyze. So the trade-off would be the practical factors if you were trying to do that. Okay, that's reliability and validity. Now, when you're doing research methods questions, it's important to use examples to support the points that you're making. So in pervert, we've got one of the E's for examples. Part of that is to help us spell the word pervert, which is more memorable, but also part of it is to get you to remember to, when you're writing your paragraphs and you're talking about the practical factors or the validity issues, to bring in examples to back that up, examples of research you've learned from some of the other topics. So here's two studies, Bowles and Gintis from education. You should know about that. The key thing there is they were doing 237 high school students. Now, if they'd interviewed them, it would have taken forever. But because they did questionnaires, they were able to get it done quickly and more efficiently. So that backs up if you did a paragraph about the practical strengths of questionnaires. Sharp, which again you should know about in terms of girls' kind of attitude to education. Sharp gave questionnaires to 249 girls, but actually she was annoyed by the fact that she couldn't get the real depth and the meaning and their full kind of opinions. So because she was annoyed by the lack of validity, she ended up doing interviews instead, or as well. So you can use that as part of the criticism of the kind of validity issues. Two good examples need to go on your note sheet, but remember, it's all about using them to support a different point. You don't just talk about the examples on their own, you link it to the practical issues or the validity issues or the ethical issues or whatever it happens to be. Finally, then we've got representativeness and then the theoretical approach towards research. In terms of representativeness, you should know what we're talking about here is kind of how easy it is to apply the results to the wider population. Can we take the results and say, well, this was true of this group of people, so it's probably true of the entire country or the entire population? And one of the key issues of that is how many people are involved in your sample, how many people are actually involved in your research. Questionnaires, because of the practical issues, in terms of being really quick and easy to do, they tend to have the largest samples and they become one of the most representative methods to use. Like a really good example is the census, which literally every household in the UK does. Okay, that is a massive question. That's a massive sample, and you can't get any more representative than having everybody in the society completing the questionnaire. You can't really do that for any other method. Okay, it wouldn't work for interviews or anything like that. It just can't happen practically. So that does tend to make it more representative. On the other hand, though, for other questionnaires, what you might find is you again end up with the same kind of people doing the questionnaire. So if it's kind of generally sent out to the public, you'll find the people who have more free time maybe are the ones who are doing it. The elderly might be more likely to complete a questionnaire than young people, because they just don't see it as part of, worth their time. Whereas people who've got a lot more free time, aren't really busy with work or kids or whatever, might have more time to complete these questionnaires. So you end up with what's called a biased sample. You might have a large sample, but if it's all made up of the same type of people, it's a biased sample and less representative, because you're not getting all the different viewpoints that exist in the population. So 2 points there, one strength, one weakness to do with representativeness. Now the theoretical perspective, this is going to be explained in a lot more detail in a later video. It's important that we understand this, because there's some really good marks there, some really good kind of depth and detail, but it's also really quite difficult. So I'll do this in a later video and have a whole video for itself. But what you need to know right now is questionnaires pretty much, all the time produce quantitative data. And that means that positivists will value them and interpretivists won't. Positivists will talk about why they love quantitative data, why that's good for them in the later video, and vice versa for the interpretivists. So for now, all you really need to note down is it's quantitative data, and so positivists are the ones who would value that as a method and more likely to use that as a method. Okay, that's it for this one. So you need to go and complete the questions on Builder now, so that you get a good score and you bring your note sheet to lesson. Thanks very much.